Hello, bonjour, shalom, and welcome to Hi There.
A culturally Jewish podcast powered by AJN.
Hi there, like hi there, but with a little more life in it.
18 times more life, technically.
I'm David.
And I'm Addie, and each week we sit down with interesting people to talk about culture, identity, and the stories that shape us. Today's guest has brought us a show with a title I'm gonna try very hard to say with a straight face.
Good luck.
Circumscribed, a true tall tale of one father, two sons, and thousands of foreskins.
You did it.
Barely.
We're joined by writer, performer, and storyteller Noam Osband, whose award-winning show is making its Canadian premiere at the Edmonton Fringe Festival this August.
Noam grew up with a father who was a Mohel, and yes, there are some pretty unbelievable stories that come with that.
But underneath the foreskins...
That's a sentence I didn't expect to hear today.
Underneath the foreskins is a really personal story about fathers and sons, losing a parent, becoming a parent yourself, and deciding which family tradition you want to carry forward.
Here's our conversation with Noam Osband.
My name has now become an object of fun and something I will talk about in a Fringe show one day, because I grew up in the modern Orthodox community of Brookline, Massachusetts, so right outside of Boston, and I really only knew non-Jews till I got to college. So everybody knew my name, and nobody had a hard time pronouncing Noam. Then I went to college, and I went to most people were not Jews, and nobody knew how to pronounce my name, and it drove me crazy. And I remember seeing Noam Chomsky speak during college, and I even told him afterwards, I was like, the only way anybody knows my name is because I reference you. And he signed the poster to Noam from Noam, which I regret not holding on to. And the other thing which I was going to say was, I'm the only member of my family who's not named after a member of the family, and that used to bug me. And maybe it's symbolic, so I'm the only one who's not religious. The rest of the family still is. And as a kid, I thought I wanted to change my name to Vincent Alexander because I loved Van Gogh and Alexander the Great.
Oh, okay.
No good reason. I'm happy I didn't. And then starting after college, I started spending a lot of time in Arkansas, and which I still do. And there it became sort of like, it started being a fun like introduction and a conversation starter with people. Because I'd often be like, oh, it's a Hebrew word from the book of Psalms. And then if I met older people, especially like older Christian women, and if I want to like really lay on the charm thick, I mean, many times I'd be like, oh, I'm Jewish, it's a Hebrew name. And they'd be like, we just love the Jewish people in the state of Israel. And I'd be like, oh, it's a Hebrew word. It's from the book of Psalms where King David writes to the Lord. And I can quote in Hebrew, you know, to dwell in the pleasantness of the Lord. And people really love it. And it's also now fun for me if I'm ever in a list and somebody gets to my name. It's very fun because I can tell there is a physical hesitation. I can see on their face because they don't know what this. They don't know what to say.
And they go through the list: Charlotte, Stephen, Mitchell. Yeah.
No, 100%. And you know, the only bad part is I sometimes have interactions with people where they say, "How do you pronounce your name? What's your preference?" And I couldn't care less. I know some people have strong feelings. I couldn't care less. And I feel like I'll often tell people, like, the most important thing is I don't care. Say whatever you want. My mom calls me Noam. And then I volunteer a lot in my kids' elementary school because I have a freelance schedule and I like to do that. And his teacher would often forget my name. And I could tell because she would thank like all the parents who came in by their first name. And then she'd be like, and Zeb's dad. And I don't care. But then my boy, who to a fault likes correcting people multiple times, have been like, no, it's Noam, or she'll pronounce my last name Osband wrong, and he'll be like, it's Osband, and I will tell him afterwards, I'm like, Zeb, it's okay, you don't need to correct people. And now it's just a fun conversation starter.
It's definitely a fun conversation starter. It is your next Fringe show, and you know, I'm sure you're percolating on ideas on that. But I want to talk about this show right now.
Yes.
And just the title of your show. I think it's probably, you know, the best or maybe the most alarming piece of marketing I've heard all year. Has anyone ever come expecting one show and left realizing they saw something completely different?
No. So I will, so people know the show title is Circumscribed, a true tall tale of one father, two sons, and thousands of foreskins. It's a show in part about growing up with a dad who was a Mohel, a Jewish ritual circumcist who circumcised me, my brothers, friends, and family. We used to bury foreskins by the tree near the garage, the usual sort of American childhood. Occasionally people, when they mention the show to me, will call the show like circumcised, and it is a play on words. So I get why they would say that. When I pitch it to people, and by now this is going to be making its Canadian debut, but I performed it in a lot of festivals in the States, and I am an extrovert, and I like at Fringe festivals approaching people to try to pitch my show. And most people go with it, but you definitely get some weird stares and some reactions where they think it's going to be much more saucy or dicey or problematic than it might otherwise be.
I can imagine like you were the kid nobody wanted to play doctor with growing up then.
That's funny. My father was also a doctor too. It was different, my oldest friend growing up, my dad circumcised him. Like he wasn't the main person in Boston, but it was something he loved to do. And I mean, lots of friends and family. And it's a joke now about like even friends of mine today that my dad did their bris. And I knew it was unique.
When did you make the connection that it was, oh my God, my father is the one who circumcised me? And that must hit you at some age and be like, that's a little unusual.
Well, I'll say a couple things. The first is I knew it was different. I didn't realize how weird it was till I got to college. Because like I said, I didn't know non-Jews growing up. I really only know Orthodox Jews in Boston. I knew that we were the only ones who had the orla tree. Orla is the Hebrew word for foreskin. That's what we called it by the garage. But I didn't realize how odd that was until I got to college, and I would sometimes mention to friends like, oh, my dad did my circumcision, and we'd bury them in the backyard, and people would be like, what? And then I was like, oh, you know what? That is actually pretty unlikely. But, so I knew that he did it as a kid. I remember one time we used to go to the mikvah every year before the important holidays, and we would all dunk together. And I remember one year, me and my dad had showered, and we were waiting for my brothers because we would all dunk together because my father loved doing ritual with us. That's partly what the show's about. And I remember him just sort of staring at my naked body and me being like, Dad, what are you looking at? And him just saying with a smile, I always appreciate a job well done. But I'll tell you, the other thing which is really sort of mind-blowing is years later I found, so my dad died young when I was 20. He was just 51. And years later, I found this photograph I had never seen, and I use it in the show. And it's my favorite photo of my dad. I keep it above my desk. He was a very religious, devout man and a really spiritual man. And he's doing a circumcision, and the light is perfectly shaded on his face, and he has this just gorgeous, intense gaze to the side. And I loved it. And then I discovered when I turned the side, that's actually me. That's actually like my own bris, which is like deeply meaningful. And so like that's my favorite picture of my old man. And that's the one that I keep above my desk. And it was a really lovely thing to discover later in life.
Contrasting that with the photo I have of my bris, where my father is giving this huge agonizing look on his face, like, oh, like I don't want to be going through that right now. Very different.
We have that with my grandfather. My Zadie was the Sandik, so he's holding me, and there's a great photograph as he seems very unhappy.
So listening to the story of your father, I mean, he sounds like this combination of serious and playful at the same time. Do you think that's where your humor comes from?
Yeah, my father had an amazing sense of humor and was also very serious. And he had this amazing role in his community where he was equally very serious, and he led Torah like learning on Friday nights, and he would often speak and give Dvar Torahs at events. But he also would push boundaries and he would anonymously publish like a satirical Torah newspaper on Purim that he would self-distribute, or the guy who was the president of the school was this really sort of august, sort of serious character. And whenever there was a bar mitzvah, my father would always like grab him to dance with him, which nobody else could have done. Anybody else, like he would have been offended by that. But my father had this like amazing sense of humor that people loved. And I think precisely because he was this real serious teacher of Torah. He was a doctor who worked with kids with cancer. He was a pediatric hematologist oncologist. So people were like, he's a serious guy. And I think it gave him leeway to be a real clown as well.
So he was
treating kids with cancer and also creating magic for his own kids?
That's what I think is part of what made him so special. And, I didn't get to talk about it with him after, he died before I was just 20. I never really got to talk about it too seriously with him. But I often think, he started doing that work in the 70s when like survival rates were zero or close to zero, and I think there must have been a part of him that loved turning the world into this really magical place for us. We would do lots of rituals, some of which isn't the most common, like to make the blessing, the bracha, when you first see trees blooming in the month of Nisan. Not everybody does that, but like he loved doing that with us. Or he'd take us out every year on the holiday of Shavuos, according to like Kabbalistic tradition, at the precise midpoint between dusk and dawn, a Chatzot Laila, the heavens open for like a split second. He would bring us out every year to see the sky open. And I think he had this real sense of magic about the world that was such a blessing to have had a dad who gave that to me.
That sounds absolutely wonderful.
Yeah. I'd love to find a place for this in the show. There's no good place for this, but I remember one time people would often have him speak at their bar mitzvahs, and he loved to make people cry because I think he thought it was like that meant it was a moving speech, and he could be a performer in his own way. And at Jacob Pilevsky's bar mitzvah, my father obviously circumcised him. My father gave a speech that I remember watching, like his mother leave in tears at the end because my father talked, and I'll probably cry thinking about it. He talked about like everybody has a miracle antenna, as it were, and it's important in life to just be attuned to the miracles that are out there, and it's easy to let that dim and not pay attention to that. But if you pay attention, there's miracles abounding. And I'll get choked up talking about him. I usually cry when I perform it because he was a very good dad, and I feel really lucky because I chose, and this is part of what the show's about as well, chose not to be Orthodox like my family, and yet I still love ritual and see the world as this magical place, which I don't think I would have without his parenting.
Okay, and I wasn't even really going to ask these kind of questions, but I'm so curious because you say, you love ritual, you're not religious. That sounds like very much like myself. What is it about that, maybe that we didn't find in religion, that didn't connect with us, but that we desperately want to hold on to something like those traditions, like those rituals?
Yeah. I love people. I have a doctorate in anthropology, and I love the topic of like ritual and thinking about people. And I think I was lucky that I was in all these places as a kid where ritual brought people together. And so I might not believe in the supernatural power of ritual anymore, but I think there's something really wonderful about the way ceremonies or things in the annual calendar can bring people together. And I think there's something really moving when people are brought together, whatever it's for. That's profoundly special to me. And I'm lucky that he exposed me to all these sorts of places and interesting rituals where people sort of were together, and that was really powerful to see. And while I didn't choose to follow a lot of what I was given, the idea that like there are these amazing things out there if you're willing to put in the time is something that I keep with me.
I mean, as funny and as remarkable as interesting as that part of the show is, I'm also thinking your show asks, how do we carry the people we love after they're gone too? Am I right?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Did you know that was going to be the show you were writing from the beginning, or did it change along the way?
I'll give you some of the genesis, and I will say that I did not realize how personally meaningful I would find the show, which in hindsight is crazy. It's like a guy doing a show about like his dad who he loved, having my first kid who's named after my dad in Hebrew and English, and how I find connections between him and how I have 2 kids and this father who is so important for me, who will never get to meet. But it stemmed out of, at first, I used to perform certain material in this show, Mortified. Mortified is like a podcast and a live show where people recite childhood writings and embarrassing things. And I discovered this letter in my attic, well, my mother's house, in her attic, when I was like 28, 29. I had completely forgotten about it. But I guess I clearly had saved it, because when I got it at age 14, I must have been like, oh, this is a keeper. And it's about, I went through this stage in middle school where I talked a lot about Satan worship, because it was like a way I could cross boundaries, but I wasn't actually like doing anything horrible or mean or whatever. But I talked for a few years excessively about worshiping the devil, which I really was not doing. It was just a way to be like
Rebellious.
rebellion. And my dad could be transgressive in his own way, and it rubbed off on me, and it's rubbed off on my son. And it's this letter that I got sent when I was in summer camp, where its word has gotten back to them that I am telling people again that I'm worshiping the devil and that I've been skinny dipping. And it's this letter, which is this, and I perform it in the show, this amazing combination of both horrible parenting based on shame. A lot of it's about like, word is getting widely spread throughout the community about what you do. Word has spread to the New York community and you don't even live there, Noam. I mean, it's very over the top. It's also an extremely warm and emotionally open letter from a father in a world where a lot of dads are not emotionally open. And, to give an example of like some of the lines, I read the whole paragraphs long letter in the show, but, like, Noam, you've been blessed with extraordinary gifts. Our job in life is to help you fashion your talents into a pattern of behavior that is characterized by kindness, compassion, and sensitivity. Quite obviously, we are failing at that task.
Oh my God.
Far more importantly, you are failing as well. So it's both like a sense of blame and shame I hope I don't carry out with my kids, but also this like really beautiful, florid writing. Anyway, so I found the letter, and it's laugh out loud funny, and I would share it with friends, because like you don't usually have a letter from your father telling you got to stop talking about worshiping the devil in camp. And then I would perform at Mortified, and I would read the letter, and it would just kill. And people would love it. And then, I would tell other stories about my dad in my life, and stories that, come up in the show, but both about circumcision, but things having sort of nothing to do with that at all. And he just was this really memorable person who, he loved, like any irreverent Jew, he used to love Holocaust humor. And I remember one time we used to get together with like our family's best friends, the Kurtzers, every year for December vacation. We do a movie marathon, and we still talk about the time he had us do like funny Nazi movies. So like To Be or Not to Be, The Producers, Not Like 17. And like, so I would just tell a lot of stories of my dad. And then at one point I was like, I think there's a show to do about having had this impactful father, about being different than he had wanted me to be, but still loving him, about becoming a father myself. And I started by just like putting down all these stories, and then over time was trying to sort of like find a sort of through line through the show, which I think I sort of have. But its genesis was just, I had these like amazing stories about my dad, and I performed in Fringes now for 8 years, and everything else I had done before was musical comedy. And this is the first storytelling show I've ever done. And I've performed like in smaller bits on stage, but I had never done it at a Fringe before. And it ended up being, I'm both very heartened by the reaction. Like it has won like storytelling awards and festivals, and that's nice to know that it resonates with people, but it's become very personally meaningful, because I'll say that like my father is still, celebrated both in our community by people who know him. There's like a large plaque about him in our synagogue, and in my family. And a lot of the things that he is really beloved for are things which aren't as, being a teacher of Torah, his strong relationship with the land of Israel, which I have a strong relationship. The majority of my family lives there, but it's a more complex relationship than I had at age 20. It's a separate topic. And so, but he was like, he died on Yom Yerushalayim, the day that like Israel, conquered like the old city in 1967. And it's a day that is more complex for me than it was when I was 20 years old. And so, but this is how we celebrate him. And what's really fun for me is I get to celebrate the parts of him that aren't that. Like, he was this really funny guy and this really irreverent guy. And, he was so serious. And, my sister became a physician in part inspired by him. And she has a copy of this medical school essay he wrote that we all remember, hung up in his office, about where some want to walk in life, I seek to fly. And as I've gotten older, I think being funny is its own really important thing. I'm a street performer who improvises songs, and I'll show you the card that I hand out that, like, I love thinking one day, like, my kids will be older and have this. On the front, it says my name, Troubadour for Hire. I walk around parks and I'll sing about anything in the world for $1. And I'll be doing this in Edmonton sometimes at night because it's fun to do. And anyways, it's a weird talent to have. But on the back, it says, because silliness is serious business. And I think that's really true. I think being silly is really important. And he could be really silly in his own way. And that's not what the family celebrates on his yahrzeit when we all talk about him. But, like, that's what was so important to me, and somebody who spends a lot of time performing in different ways on stage or in parks, making people laugh. That's a real value to me that I got in part from him. And so it's been really fun to both tell his story in the way that it makes sense to me, but also sometimes afterwards, when people will come up and be like, your dad sounded like a really special guy, it feels nice to be able to be like, for them to pick up on that feels nice, to be maintaining a connection with my dad, 25 years after he died. It's nice that, like, there's this whole other part to our relationship which developed decades after he died, but which has now become a deeply meaningful part of my relationship with him.
Absolutely. And I can hear the love and the emotion in your voice as you're telling these amazing, wonderful, hilarious stories. And it just makes me think of, like, I lost my father 2.5 years ago. And one thing I've noticed about my relationship with him was, the relationship never ended. It changes over time, right? And I'm curious, it seems like the relationship with your dad has not ended 25 years ago. It's just morphed and changed. Do you ever think, like, am I living up to be the guy? Would he support what I'm doing? Is he there with me as I'm doing these shows?
Sure. Especially because religion was super important. I never got to tell him before he died that I already wasn't being religious, and sort of kind of knew it wouldn't be that way. He, the last couple of weeks he was in the hospital. He had thyroid cancer. It took 2 years, and then he passed. And he had an emergency trach, and he was in the hospital for a few weeks. And part of me really wanted to tell him because I knew it probably was the end. And my best friend, I don't blame him for saying this, was like, I don't know if you want to stress the guy out right now. And I don't think that was the wrong response. But I think about him all the time. And in some ways, being a parent, and this comes up in the show, is like such a, I think about him when I do certain things with my kids. I do the same tickling games with my kids he did with me. The claw coming down from the sky and nothing can stop the claw. Or I love sharing music with my kids, and he shared so much music with me, and I have such good memories of going to concerts with him, or him driving me to school and clapping out the rhythm to, like, Stravinsky, or he always sang the same song after Shabbos on the drive home from shul, very loudly and clapping. And so much of the parenting I have is either they're things that he did I'd like to do with my kids, or I think about, I just think about him in my own, parenting with my own kids, So I'd like to think that he would have found the show amusing, and and would have liked it. I think he would. I think he would have.
If he was sitting in the audience, which joke do you think would he laugh the hardest at?
There's a whole I'll tell you what's a good thing is, like, because I've never talked about this with him, and we never talked about it as a joke, but there's a whole long section where at age 19, I gave blood. The camp where I like swam nude and talked about the devil, I later worked as a counselor because I guess they had strange hiring practices. And I worked as a counselor, and that summer I gave blood. And then I get back, and I'm getting ready to start college, and I get this letter from the Red Cross. And it's like, hey, FYI, we tested your blood for STDs, and your syphilis test was positive, then negative, and then inconclusive. And I was freaked out. The important thing also to realize is I was very much a virgin. I did not think that I had it. But I was like, in hindsight, I had given blood after a cold, which is, I think, what did it. But I ended up having to this is like before Google, and I was still very naive and sheltered. I had no idea how to get tested. And I, as I say in the show, I wish I had been exposed to it, but I very much had not been. And, but I still was freaked out. So I ended up telling my parents about it, who amazingly were pretty chill, even though you have to imagine if your son says to you, I have this positive syphilis test from the Red Cross, but I promise you, I didn't actually have sex. And then I went to the hospital where he worked to get my physical to start college. And the nurse who gave it to me, everybody knew my dad was an Orthodox Jew. He wore his yarmulke at work. He never took it off there. If they ordered him food, it had to be from one of the 7 kosher restaurants in Boston. So everybody knew he was religious. And she comes up to me before giving me the physical, and she's like, I got to tell you, Noam, it was the funniest thing. Before rounds today, your dad was like, hey, my son's about to start college. We're really excited for him. I need someone to give him a physical. Can somebody do that? And I volunteered. And then at the end, he came up to me and he said, thank you so much, Cassie. We really appreciate it. Really excited for Noam. And then he got very embarrassed, and he turned his face down and he leaned in and he said, now, he's a good Jewish boy, but I also am going to need you to give him a syphilis test for the physical. And which she must have loved. And it's funny, I never talked about that story much with my dad. I never really talked about the birds and the bees too much with my dad. And I think it'd be funny for him to hear that now, which I'm curious, if he appreciated the humor of it at the time. I know I did. I thought the whole thing was kind of amazingly funny.
I would be turning beet red if that was happening to me in the moment.
Oh, yeah. I mean, when I told my parents, I definitely was and both of them over the course of the next 2 weeks, I remember they would each take a turn walking into the room and be like, Noam, if there's ever anything you want to talk about with us, you can. And so, it'd be fun to get his take on that story because I never talked about that with him.
Wow. I can imagine other people who are coming to see the show have very similar stories about their own father. Do they ever come up to you and talk to you post-show? This is what my dad meant to me. This reminded me of my relationship.
Yeah, no, 100%. It's very, sometimes I get people who come up to me who have lost a parent or especially a dad recently, and it's always lovely to talk about that with them. Yeah, even though it was years away, like I said, I think of my dad every day, hearing him performing a show about him. And so to be able to sort of have somebody say, oh, it made me think of my own dad and the things that were special about him, or my dad, died 8 months ago. And it's kind of crazy because he had this in common with your dad. That's always sort of very sweet to hear. I mean, in some ways, what's also very fun about the show is I think the show is extremely universal because it's so specific. So it is, I am pretty sure probably the most Jewish show by far at the Fringe. I'm giving long extended quotes from stuff about Jewish halacha, or no other show is using phrases like Horek v'al Yavor or Chatzot Laila, but I think there's something extremely universal about the story of somebody having a really loving parent who also had really strong ideas about how you live your life, and getting older and maintaining that love and relationship, even though you are now different from how they expected, is in some ways, I mean, that's the most archetypical story. And it's very fun for me, especially when I hear from people who have extremely different backgrounds, who will be like, oh, this sort of reminds me of my own story, and that's both is very lovely to hear as a human, but also, artistically, it's nice to feel when I pitch it to people on the street and stuff, I'm always this is both a story, which I'm sure you've never sat through a show about somebody talking about their dad who was a circumcist, but I promise you it's relatable. It's actually extremely relatable. And usually people find it so by the end.
I want to reflect just on what you said, because the show is incredibly, it begins with a very specific Jewish ritual. It ends somewhere much more universal. What do you hope audiences are thinking about on the drive home?
Love. It's the last word of the show. You know, I love the show ends with a touching anecdote about going to the bathroom with my son on an Amtrak train in the United States. And what's very sweet, and my dad would have loved this. And as somebody who loves transgression, I love that I've managed to take this story, which you can come and hear at the show, why it is sort of, so, you know, this story that is sort of like an absurd idea for a story, but becomes this beautiful ribbon that wraps the show, and this really lovely moment of parenting for me. If people come away just thinking about love and the love for the people that they have and how lovely it feels to both be loved and be loving, then I'm very happy with that.
Noam, can you remind us when and where your show is happening?
Yeah, Circumscribed, a true tall tale of one father, two sons, and thousands of foreskins. It is taking place at Holy Trinity Anglican Church in the Sanctuary. I appreciate the irony, but it's a lovely venue. I performed there 4 years ago. They're super chill. The first show is Friday, August 14th. The last show is the last day of the Fringe, August 23rd. There are 8 shows. You know, it's funny. The other thing I'll say, I'm actually doing 2 shows at the Fringe. The other one is going to sound. The other one is a parody televangelist called Brother Loves Good Time Gospel Hour, where I play like a shady, randy, greedy televangelist. It sort of mocks televangelists, not religion. I have a lot of respect for religion. I don't for televangelists. And it's like a musical comedy that's very bawdy, and I would not say for the whole family, but people over 18. But this show, it's fun to do because this is the first show I've ever done that's really, I think it's extremely funny, but has elements of earnestness and sincerity. And I've never done that in a show before. And it's really lovely to watch people cry at stories of my dad and laugh.
Wonderful, amazing. Your father sounded like a mensch. You sound like a mensch. And for people who are in Edmonton, please check out this show and the other show as well, too, for the evangelical priest. What is the name of that show?
Brother Loves Good Time Gospel Hour. That's at Mile Zero Dance Studio. And the same thing, it's going to be running from Friday the 14th until the last day of Fringe, the 25th.
All right, Noam, we're going to leave it there. But thank you so much for coming on the pod, and have a great run while you're up in Edmonton.
Thank you so much. I can't wait to come back. It's such a lovely city. I have my favorite bike routes that I do. I have my favorite poutine place. I have certain walks I do that I like now. And I love Edmonton and can't wait to be back.
Wonderful.
What a great conversation.
You hear a title with thousands of foreskins in it, and you don't necessarily expect to end up thinking about your own family.
But that's really what the show is about.
And for me, especially having lost my own dad a couple of years ago, there was a lot in that conversation that really hit home.
I think that's what makes Noam's story so relatable. His family may be very specifically his, but the love, the loss, and the complicated relationships we have with our parents, that's pretty universal.
And Circumscribed is going to be playing at the Edmonton Fringe Festival from August 14th to the 23rd. If you're interested in seeing the show or would like to purchase tickets, please visit the Fringe website at fringetheater.ca.
Here is what is going on in your community. On August 9th in Edmonton, Shalom Baby turns 5. Bring your whole family to celebrate and enjoy a fun-filled afternoon of playground time, spray park fun, crafts, and tasty snacks.
The 11th annual Jewish Family Services Calgary Golf Tournament is taking place on August 13th, and Chai there will be there teeing off.
On August 23rd, join the Chevra Kadisha of Calgary for the dedication of their new Gan HaZikaron, Garden of Remembrance, and the unveiling of the memorial of those lost on October 7th.
Splash and snack with PJ Library in Calgary on August 27th at the South Glenmore Splash Park.
The Jewish Senior Center in Edmonton is looking for a new executive director. Is this the job for you? Visit jewishedmonton.org/job opportunities to learn more. Deadline is August 28th.
A tasty one. Come check out Pickle Fest in Calgary on August 29th, a celebration of all things fermented. You can hear more about Pickle Fest on the next episode of Hi There.
The Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers in Concert is coming to Alberta. Come watch the film with live orchestra backing August 28th and 29th in Calgary, and September 11th and 12th in Edmonton.
Craving a good Montreal bagel? NWC BBYO is holding their annual Bagels for Breakfast fundraiser. Make your order by September 1st and enjoy fresh St. Viateur bagels delivered straight from Montreal. Hi There is a culturally Jewish podcast powered by AJN. For more news, visit albertajewishnews.com. Production by Real Mensch Studios.
Take care of yourselves.
Take care of each other.
And call your mother.
Hi there.